Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this tutorial we are going to create a complete dynamic 5-star rating system from scratch using PHP, MySQL and JavaScript. But first let me explain what our application does. On the screen you see 3 movie titles and their ratings. Let's rate the first movie and give it 4 stars. Watch the average rating and the vote count when I click on the star. Instantly the average rating and the vote count have changed. Now notice that I cannot rate the same movie again, because the rating section is now disabled. But I can still rate the other 2. Let's give the second movie 1 star and the third movie 5 stars. Now let's look under the hood to see how it works. The rating data is stored in the database in a table named ratings. This process happens every time we click on a star. The ratings table has an ID, a movie ID, a rating, and a created at column. The rating column stores the star's value, and the movie ID column stores the associated ID from another table in the database called movies. In this table, we have an ID and a title column. We see that the first movie has an ID of 1. Now, when we go back to the ratings and look for a movie ID of 1, we can see all the ratings that this movie has received. This is how we associate database tables. We will look at the database tables again during our coding when needed. Now let's jump into my editor to see the files that we need to build our rating system. Okay, in my editor I have an index.php file which contains a basic HTML structure. It includes a link to the style sheet and a script tag that points to the JavaScript file. Next I have a script.js file. This file will hold our JavaScript code. I also have a functions.php file. In here we are going to write a couple of PHP functions that our application needs. Next I have another PHP file named rate.php. This file will receive the data that the JavaScript file sends and save it in the database and return the average rating and vote count. And finally we have the styles.css file, which already contains all the necessary CSS code. The most important rules here are the last 4. These rules are responsible for the hover effect, filling the stars with yellow and disabling the stars for a movie that has already been rated. I will put a link in the description below so you can download the CSS file if you want to follow along. Okay, that's enough of an introduction. Let's jump into the index file and start coding. First, I'll add a div with a class of container to hold everything. Now, I'm going to hardcode a single movie item first. This makes the HTML structure much easier to understand. Once we get the static version working, we'll make it fully dynamic by fetching the movies and ratings from the database at the end of the tutorial. Okay, let's add an h1 tag for the page title. Next, I'll create a div with a class of movie item. Inside this, I'll add an h3 tag to display the movie's title. Below the title, I'll add another div to wrap our rating stars. I've given this div a class of rating stars, a data movie ID of 1 and a data average rating of 3.2. We'll use these data attributes in our JavaScript file to identify the movie and its current rating. Inside the rating stars element, I'll create 5 span elements, each with a class of star. Each span also has a data value attribute representing its position. The first star has a value of 1, the second has a value of 2, and so on. The visible text for each star is the HTML entity for an empty star. I'll put a link in the description where you can copy this symbol, or you can just use the HTML code. Finally, I'll add one more div with a class of average rating. For now, I have hard-coded the text to show an average of 3.2 and a vote count of 7. Don't worry about these hard-coded values. They will all be replaced with dynamic data from our PHP script later on. Okay, let's switch over to the browser to see what we've just created. Great, we can see the movie title, the empty rating stars, and the average rating text we hard-coded. Now let's check the hover effect. Perfect, our CSS is working as expected. The stars light up when I move the mouse over them. Now it's time to jump into the JavaScript file and make this interactive. The first thing that I will do in the JavaScript file is to add a DOM content loaded event listener, so the code inside runs when the page is fully loaded. Next, I'll select all elements with a class rating stars and store them in a rating containers variable. Right now, this will only find one element since we've only hard-coded one movie item. After that, I will create a variable named storage key and set it equal to the string movie ratings. We will use this key to store the ratings in the browser's local storage. Doing so, we will prevent the users to vote a movie twice. Now let's write a reusable function to handle updating the star's appearance. We'll call it updateStars. This function will be responsible for filling the stars based on the movie's average rating. For example, if a movie has an average rating of 3.2, this function will display 3 filled stars and 2 empty ones. Our updateStars function will accept 2 arguments: container, which is the specific rating stars div for a movie, and rating, which is the average rating value. Inside the function, we will access all span elements with a class of star from the given container and store them in the stars variable. Next, we'll take the rating and round it to the nearest whole number because we can only fill whole stars. Now we loop through each of the stars using a for each loop. The loop gives us access to each star element and its index. Inside the loop, we'll use an if statement to check if the star's index is less than the rounding rating. If it is, we'll add the filled class to the star, which our CSS uses to turn it yellow. We also need to change the star's text from an empty star to a filled one. You can copy and paste the star from this website, or you can use the HTML entity code instead. Next, we have an else block where we remove the filled class and change the inner HTML to an empty star. This function will be used several times in our JavaScript code, so we don't have to write the same code again and again. Next, we're going to look in the local storage if there are any ratings using the storage key and save them in the saved ratings variable. Notice that if nothing is saved in the local storage, the saved ratings variable will hold an empty object. Next, we're going to use a for-off loop to go through each rating container and access the movie ID and the average rating. So let's get first the movie ID and next the average rating. Again, if there is no average rating, we set the value to 0. Next, we're going to use the updateStars function and pass in as arguments the container and the average rating. This will fill the stars when the page first loads. After that, we'll check if the current movie ID exists in our saved ratings object. If it does, it means that the user has already rated this movie, so we will disable the container by adding the rated CSS class. Now, before we continue, let's check our code in the browser to see if it works. Okay, if I refresh the page, we should see 3 yellow stars because our hard-coded average rating is 3.2. Let's see. Perfect. So far, so good. Now let's go back to the JavaScript file to continue. Okay, I'm back in the JavaScript file. Now we need to add a click event listener to the stars, but only if their container hasn't been disabled. First, I'll access all stars within the current container. Remember, we are still inside a for-off loop. Now I will use another for-off loop to add a click event listener to each star. Inside the click event, we get the data value of the star that was clicked on. Next, we update instantly the stars according to the user's vote using our updateStars function. Finally, we save this new rating to our saved ratings object in local storage and disable the container by adding the rated class to prevent any more votes. Now that we have collected the data that we need, it's time to send it in the rate.php file and from there to the database. The first argument to fetch is the path to the PHP file that will handle the request, which in our case is rate.php. Also, in the request body, we send a JSON string holding a movie ID and the rating value. Next, we are going to fetch the response from the rate.php file as JSON. After that, we are going to access the data, which now is converted to a JavaScript object. But for now, we are just going to log the server response to the console. We still have a few things to do in the JavaScript file, but it will make more sense to get the backend working first and then come back to finish our JavaScript code. Now, before we go to the rate.php file, we will go to the functions.php file to write a function to connect to the database. Okay, in the connect function we have our database connection details. The database name is MyDB, which holds the movies and the ratings tables. We will use PDO to connect to the database, so here we have the DSN or data source name string, where we specify the host, the database and the character set. Next we have an options array to configure the PDO attributes. The first attribute tells PDO to throw exceptions on errors, the second argument tells PDO to fetch the data as an associative array, and the third argument tells PDO to use native prepared statements for better security and performance. And finally we create and return a new PDO object to connect to the database using all the data above. Okay, now that we have the connect function ready, let's go to the rate.php file to continue with the backend. First, we'll use the header function to specify that the rate.php file will return JSON content. Next, we require the functions.php file so we have access to the functions in the file, and also execute the connect function and store the connection that the function returns in the PDO variable. After that, we access the data that the fetch API sends from the JavaScript file. But we have to use the JSON decode function to convert them to a PHP array using the true keyword. If we omit the true keyword, the function will return a PHP object. In our case, we will work with an array. Now we need to validate the data we receive from the JavaScript file. In the if statement, we are checking if the data variable is valid and if the movie ID and ratings keys exist in the data array. Remember, those are the properties that the JavaScript file sends. If this condition fails, meaning we didn't receive the correct data, we'll set the HTTP response code to 400, which means bad request. We'll also send a JSON response back to the JavaScript file with a status of error and a message saying invalid data provided, and then exit the script. If this happens, we will see the error message in the browser's console. If the data is correct, we'll store the movie ID and rating in their own variables. Next, we use a try-catch block to query the database. We are using a prepared statement to insert the data in the database. First, we prepare the insert query, and then we execute it. Now, before we continue, let's check in the browser if everything works till now. But first, let's finish the catch block. If a PDO exception occurs, we'll set the HTTP response code to 500, which indicates a server error, and then echo a JSON string with an error message. For now, if the query is successful, let's just return a simple success JSON response. Okay, let's jump into the browser to check if everything works so far. I'll open the DevTools by pressing F12 and go to the Console tab. Now let's rate the movie. I'll give it 4 stars. Okay, we see the success message in the console. Let's also check the local storage. I'll go to the Application tab, and here are the ratings. Perfect. As you can see, we can't rate the movie twice. Our rated class is working correctly. Finally, let's take a look at the database. Excellent. The data was successfully stored in the ratings table. Now let's go back to the rate.php file to finish the script. Now that we have saved new data in the database, the average rating and vote count has changed. Therefore, we have to fetch the data again and calculate the new average and vote count in order to send them back to the browser to update the movie ratings. We'll do this with another SQL query. Let me explain what is going on here. We prepare a select statement. We use the average function on the rating column to get the new average, and we give it an alias of average rating. We'll also use the count function on the ID column to get the total number of votes, giving it an alias of vote count. We'll access the average rating and vote count in the PHP code to send their values to the JavaScript file. Okay, we're selecting from the ratings table where movie ID equals the specific movie ID that was just rated. We will bind the question mark with a movie ID right now. You see that in the execute method and inside an array, we bind the question mark with a given movie ID. Finally, we store the data in the new ratings data variable. We're almost done here. The last thing we'll do is to send the data alongside with our response. So in our JSON string, we'll add the new average, which we round first, and also the new vote count. And now we are done here. So let's go back to the JavaScript file to handle the data that the server returns. We will continue from where we left off. I'll check in an if statement if the status property returns success. Remember, we send the status from the rate.php file. So, if the condition is true, we target the next element sibling of the rating container, which is the average rating div element. This is the container, and this is the next element sibling, and store it in the average rating element variable. Next, we take the average rating element and update the text content with the data from the rate.php file. And finally, we call the update stars function again to update the field stars and the average rating. We're almost done with the JavaScript code. The last thing that I have to do is to catch the error. First, I will show the error in the browser's console. Then I remove the rated CSS class from the movie that was just clicked. Next, I delete the movie ID from the saved ratings. And after that, I will update the local storage. And lastly, I will update the stars and the rating average. And we are done with the JavaScript code. Okay, now we have to jump to the index.php file and make the movie items dynamic. Let's go to the top of the file and open PHP tags. I will require the functions.php file and I will call the getMovieData function and store the result in the movies data variable. Don't be confused, the getMovieData function doesn't exist yet. So let's go to the functions.php file to create it. Inside the function, I will connect to the database and store the connection in the PDO variable. Next, we have a select query where we join the movies and the ratings table, so we combine the two tables in a single result set. We set the letter M as a reference to the movies table and the letter R as a reference for the ratings table. Let's break down what's happening here. We are selecting ID and title from the movies table using the letter M for movies as a shortcut. Then we'll calculate two things from the ratings table. The average rating using the average SQL function and pass in as argument the rating column from the ratings table. The result is stored in an alias named average rating, which we can access with PHP. And the number of votes using count on the ID from the rating table. Here we use vote count as its alias. Then we say from movies M. Here we set the alias to M. Then we have the left join combining the ratings table aliased as R using the condition where the ID from the movies table equals the movie ID from the ratings table. Finally, we use group by movie ID and movie title so that the average and vote count are calculated per movie. This will return a single associative array so we can work with. Okay, next we jump back to the index file to make the rating system dynamic. We called earlier the getMovieData function and stored the returned result set in the movies data variable. Now I will wrap the whole movie item container in a for each function to loop through the movies data array. I will access from the movies data array each movie as movie. I will display the movie title. In the data movie ID attribute, I will echo the movie ID. And in the data average rating attribute, I will display the average rating. Next, I will run a for loop 5 times to create 5 span elements which are representing our stars. Next, I will assign in the data value attribute the I variable. So the first star will have a data value of 1, the second star a data value of 2, and so on. Next, I will assign the rounded average rating to the average variable, the vote counts to the count variable, and last we echo the average rating and the vote count on the page. Okay, we are done coding. Now is the moment of truth. Let's jump into the browser and see if our code works. I will reload the page. Perfect, we see the movies from the database. As you can see, the first movie has already an average star rating and a vote count. That is because we have already voted this movie. The other two movies have an average rating and vote count of 0. Also, we cannot rate the first movie again because the ratings for this movie exist in the local storage. Okay, now let's go and vote the second movie with 3 stars. Perfect, the user interface is instantly updated and displays the correct data. Okay, now let's vote the last movie and give it 5 stars. Again, we see the correct data. And also we see the ratings in the local storage. Now let's remove the data from the local storage and vote again. First, reload the page. Let's say 3 stars, 4 stars, and 2 stars. Perfect. Our rating system is working fine. Now, since we used PDO in this tutorial to query the database, I have another video for you in which we create a reusable database class using PDO in PHP. Check it out. And that's it, guys, for today. I hope you liked the video. Subscribe if you like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.